are the design choices. And as Gokul mentioned, I will speak first about I will speak mostly about questions rather than answers, because I do not know the answers. One of the key questions is whether we want to set standard, or the regulator wants to set standard or more bespoke rules. As I already mentioned, ecosystems have different business models, even when they provide similar services. And there is a risk that a high-level rule will not be suitable for all firms or services. But on the other hand, developing bespoke rules and also implementing and monitoring bespoke rules is much more time-consuming, so you need a bigger regulatory unit. The second question is to what extent the regulation should be fixed. Again, these are new markets, they move fast, so regulations could become outdated and inappropriate quite quickly. And it is also possible that these new instruments, regulatory instruments, prove ineffective, which means the need for revisions. However, if we have highly flexible rules that will provide less certainty, and changing the regulation frequently is also quite resource intensive. Another question is which firms to regulate. So we have quantitative or qualitative criteria for firms to be in scope. The quantitative thresholds provide clarity, and they are quicker to establish and to apply. However, qualitative criteria is more suitable for specific or new situations to establish whether the regulation should apply firm or not. Another question to decide for the regulator is whether we require firms to demonstrate, or whether we want regulators to assess compliance. Requiring firms to demonstrate compliance themselves may mean that we only need a smaller regulatory unit. However, platforms would obviously have incentives to gain the compliance reports and demonstrate their best numbers, and that could have some unintended consequences on their behavior. So these are some questions, and I will now run through how the EU's DMA is dealing with these in practice. So I believe that the DMA is a set of relatively specific rules, but it also has a general anti-avoidance provision. So it sets out that this, you need to do or you are not supposed to do. But then there is a rule that says we have the objectives of contestability and fairness, and you have to apply everything in a way that you meet these objectives. So just because a firm can explain why a specific provision is not relevant for them, they still need to act in a way that the overall objectives of the DMA would be achieved. The EU gave an explicit allowance for revisions, and as I understand, they are aiming for an iterative process with the firms themselves. They set quantitative criteria on who should be in scope, but this can be challenged on a qualitative basis, both by the firms and the authority itself. And it is the firms who are required to demonstrate their compliance, but the EC is preparing a template, a compliance report template, and is consulting on what should go into that template. Now, next I would like to cover what kind of expertise is required within a regulatory unit. Obviously, the regulators must build a team with the necessary expertise. And I think this is a bit broader now than it used to be for classic competition authorities. We obviously need legal lawyers who can interpret and apply the rules. But we will also need people who understand what the platforms are saying, the technical feasibility, the technical arguments, and can interpret and respond to these and basically translate these technical arguments to the policy people. And this could potentially include AI experts. We need behavioral scientists who can assess whether there are any behavioral insights that alter or inhibit effective implementation of the rules. And there is a question of whether we need economists, because the big difference between the DMA and the competition law, the existing competition law, is that we don't require, the regulations don't really give explicit space for economists to come in with loads of analysis. They assume the effect. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to prove that the conduct has any harmful effect. But there is still scope for economists to add value. And Amelia Fletcher has a separate paper on it, which I encourage everyone to look at in terms of what benefits, what useful roles economists could have. But most importantly, what I would like to highlight is that the regulatory unit will have to cooperate and hands with these large platforms. Otherwise, the regulations could go all in waste. So you need to have people who can engage the people in